Coventry University presently. I have also been a Darwin Community of Practitioner member for a few years, been to a few workshops in Linköping. Maybe some of you have met me there. So let's start. This is about Darwin, of course, and Darwin is about resilience. And it's the guidelines tells us that to be resilient, we need 4 abilities, the resilience abilities. And they are the ability to anticipate, the ability to learn and evolve, the ability to monitor, and the ability to respond and adapt. This is coming, much of the work we have here, much of the guidelines is inspired by Erik Holnagel. And he tells us that you must be a little bit careful with these abilities because they are not equal. And the balance between them will depend on what kind of organization you're running and what kind of operations you're doing. And he gives this example of a fire brigade where the ability to respond is very, very important, while the ability to anticipate might not be as important. And on the other hand, he mentions a sales organization where the ability to anticipate might be very, very important. So they're not equal. Their importance will vary depending on what kind of organization you're having. He also says that we are typically, in most organizations, we do have the ability to respond. It can, of course, always be improved. We have the ability to learn. We look at things going bad and we investigate them and we learn to not repeat them. He's saying that typically the ability to monitor is not as good in most organizations, and the most difficult one is the ability to anticipate. I will talk about all 4 of them, but I will start with just this introduction here. The Darwin Guidelines says that they are intended for or directly addressed to policymakers, decision makers, and managers at different levels in an organization, and that they can only indirectly affect the activities of frontline operators or first responders in crisis management. And it repeats itself a little bit by saying that the guidelines are not directly addressed to frontline operators or first responders in crisis management, although their activities will be indirectly impacted by the guidelines if their practices and procedures have been revised or designed based on the guidelines. So that is very true, but I see a risk that when you read this, you forget about the frontline. And this is my message here. Don't forget the frontline when you're working with the guidelines. And I will tell you a little bit more. I will give you examples within the 4 abilities. First, I will say this. You find very often in books and papers and discussions and so on that you divide an operational system into a sharp end and a blunt end. And the figure here or the symbology is the spear or the javelin, like on the picture here. You have 2 parts of it. You have the blunt end, which is where you control and support your spear or javelin, and the same with an organization. Managers. You control and support, you aim your organization, and you make the high-level decisions. At this end of the organization, you typically find low risk and high power. And then, on the other hand, you will find the sharp end, where you find the first responders, the high risk and the low power. And this is, of course, a very simplified way of describing an organization, but it still has something to say. And you need to balance the blunt end and the sharp end. They are both very important, and they both have their specific roles in an organization. I will talk mostly about the sharp end. And we will talk about the 4 abilities. We will start with the ability to monitor, which is one of the abilities that Holnagel is saying that this is typically not very good in organizations. And he says that monitoring, the ability to monitor, is the knowing what to look for, or being able to monitor that which is or could seriously affect the system's performance in the near term. And he mentions that it's not only negatively, it's positively or negatively. So you need to monitor for both. And the monitoring must cover the system's own performance as well as what happens in the environment. And he says, one type of indicators that you would look for monitoring are called leading indicators, because they can be used as valid precursors for changes and events that are about to happen. And it says leading indicators are generally seen as very attractive. But the main difficulty with leading indicators is that the interpretation requires an articulated description or model of how the system functions. And I believe what he's saying here is that you can't really monitor your organization unless you know it very well. You understand it, how it works, how it functions. And then that makes me think about this. Now, this is an environment. It could be an operations or an organizational environment. It's work as imagined, very well designed, work as prescribed. This is about how it's supposed to be. You have a road for the cars and you have a road for the bicycles. Very good to separate them because you reduce the risk, of course. And you see even the road for the bicycles is very well designed with these white tiles in the middle of it, separating bicycles on opposite directions so they do not collide. Well designed. This is work as imagined and work as prescribed. I think this is from Holland because I stole this picture from a presentation by Signe Dekker recently in Amsterdam. So I think it's in Holland, and it's very neat, and it's typically because they are very good at biking, using bikes a lot. So this is nice, and of course, I think you have already seen that there's something in this picture that doesn't look all right. So this is what's coming. This is work is done. And you will find this in any organization. And some people say that work as imagined is never exactly as work is done. Well, perhaps there are the few occasions where it is, but normally there is a gap. It could be large or it could be small. And the general idea is that you want to keep it as small as possible. There is a problem with you if you have a big gap between work as imagined and work as done. But we're talking about the ability to monitor here. And if you're monitoring based on work as imagined only, you are missing a lot. Now, why is there a difference? In this case, I don't know. I haven't been there. I just stole the picture from Dekker, right? But you can start thinking about it. And one obvious thing is you could say, the girl in red is not following the procedures. She's breaking the law or the rules, right? Why? Perhaps she's lazy, taking a shortcut. Perhaps she's just complacent. Or she's a bad apple. Take her away of the equation and everything is fine. Now, all these are quick assumptions, and it's very easy and human to think like that, but it doesn't really get you anywhere. To really understand why there is a gap, you need to get down there into that road. Maybe take your own bicycle and drive like they are doing to find out why it makes sense, because that is what we're looking for. For some reason, it makes sense for the girl in red to do what she's doing, although it's not as imagined or as prescribed. And I can just guess, but let's look at these two girls, the girl in red and the girl in blue. Maybe they were biking together. Maybe they are sisters or friends or mother and daughter or something. And when they approach this area where the bicycle road is turning, she understood, the girl in red, that if she would keep on biking in parallel with her blue friend, she will get in trouble because she will either get too close to the girl in blue or too close to the tree, maybe colliding with the tree. So for safety reasons, she decided to do the shortcut. That's one possibility. But to find out, you really need to talk to these girls and maybe go there with the bike yourself. Because you really need to understand it to be able to close it. Just saying that it's wrong, that you don't want it, is not enough. Another way to look at the difference between work as done and work as imagined is to change work as imagined to become like work as done. So you could say, it's stupid having the bicycle road turning like this. Of course, people want to bike straight ahead. Let's rebuild the bicycle road and problem is solved. You have work as imagined equal to work as done. But then you must also look at the designer. Why did it make sense for the designer to do it like this? I, again, don't know, but I can guess. You see there's a road coming from left here, and you can see the shark teeth painted where the car is supposed to stop. So by designing it this way, you get one stop for the cars entering the bigger road, where the car can stop, give way to the bicycles, give way to the cars before going out. If you design the bicycle roads going straight ahead, you will get two stops for the car, which is inefficient, and also the risk that the car is not stopping for the bikes, only for the cars. So you really need to look at both work is imagined and work is done to understand both and see how you could possibly close the gap. So to do this, to understand the difference between work is imagined and work is done. And you need that to be able to monitor in an efficient way. To do that, you need to get to the sharp end, because that is where the knowledge is. So that's one of my points here. To do the ability to monitor, you get to the sharp end. Observe what is happening there. Ask people, interview people working at the sharp end to really understand what is happening in the organization, to find out about the difference between work as imagined and work as done. Move on to the next ability. This is the ability to learn and evolve. And Hollnagel says that this is knowing what has happened, or being able to learn from experience, and in particular to learn the right lessons from the right experience. He's also telling us that most organizations do this. They're pretty good at this, but he also says counting how often something happens is not learning. Knowing how many accidents have occurred, for instance, says nothing about why they have occurred, nor anything about the many situations when accidents did not occur. And without knowing why something happens, as well as knowing why it does not happen, it is impossible to propose effective ways to improve safety. That leads us to this. It's a figure from Hollnagel, Wears and Braithwaite's white paper about resilient healthcare net. It's a bell-shaped curve, sort of a typical normality curve, and it shows us that there's a little part painted in red here. That's things that go wrong, unwanted outcomes. And in most organizations, we learn a lot from that. Whenever something really bad happens, like an accident or a bad incident, we get reports, we do investigations, we put a lot of time and resources to find out why it went wrong, because we want to stop that happening again, right? We do that. In all organizations, we do that. And Hollnagel is telling us that by only doing that, we are missing a lot. So let's look at the rest of the area in the bell-shaped curve. That is all representing things that have planned outcomes. Things go right. We don't get incident reports, no accident report. We don't investigate. Maybe we don't learn. On the left half of this, he's saying things that are difficult but go right. So what do we find there? Well, perhaps we find conflicting goals that made it difficult to handle the situation. Maybe we found that the procedures were not well written, hard to use, or even that for the situation that turned up, there was no written procedure. There was no work as imagined, so we just had to go directly to work as done. Maybe there were technical equipment that wasn't working, but we still managed to solve things. And of course, those situations, there's a lot to learn from them. On the right half, you find what he's calling positive surprises. So what you find there is you were able to finish earlier than planned, or the result was not only good, it was excellent, better than expected, or you found out a totally new way of doing it that was much better, much more efficient, and innovation. And there is also a lot to learn. In most organizations, I would say that all those things just goes down to normal work, everyday work. It works out fine. We don't have to look into it because it works. But Hollnagel is saying to really learn, you must look into this as well, and perhaps put even more resources into this area than on the area of the few things that go wrong. You also see that the area outside the red is a very big area, so there's a lot of things happening there, and there's a lot of room for maneuver, and maybe there is a big gap between work is imagined and work is done, but there's also something else. It's called drifting, normal operations drifting, and there's an excellent book if you want to learn more about drifting. It's called Friendly Fire. Maybe you have already read it. Otherwise, I recommend it. It's written by a guy called Scott A. Snook, and the book is about a terrible accident happened in 1994, so it's quite a long time ago. In the north of Iraq, there was a mission, and during this mission, the mission had been going on for several years, very successful, no accidents, everything was working fine. But then in 1994, 2 American fighters shot down 2 American helicopters. Friendly fire, killing 26 people. And In response to this disaster, the complete array of military and civilian investigative and judicial procedures ran their course. And what were they looking for? Who is to blame? And Snook did this investigation, and he spent almost 2 years of investigation with virtually unlimited resources. And after 2 years, what did he find? He found no culprit emerged, no bad guy showed himself, no smoking gun was found. He basically found no one to blame. And of course, people were not very pleased with that, right? They had a terrible accident, someone is to blame, and he didn't find anyone. He found lots of people doing job in a reasonable way according to the resources and the possibilities they were having. And the book attempts to make sense of this tragedy, a tragedy that on the surface makes no sense at all. This is a picture from the book. It's a causal map showing the accident, and you find the accident itself in the lower right corner, shoot down. Now, why did this happen? You can go just a little bit up. You see F-15 lead misidentified hellos as hives. So the two fighters, two F-15 Eagle fighters, the lead aircraft went closer, had a look at the helicopters to make sure they were not friendly, misidentified them as Russian type Hind helicopters, and they shot them down. You could have stopped there, couldn't you? Here's the guy to blame, human error, right? But Snook went further. So he said, why did he misidentify them? And you find, I think, 7 or 8 arrows pointing to this. One of them says that the technical system for identification of friend and foe that should have told them that this was friendly helicopters, the system failed. You find that they were on different radio frequencies. You find that there were ambiguous radio calls, and you find that the US Army Air Force had poor training on helicopter identification for these pilots. And there are a lot of other explanations. And you can go further and further back, and the further left and the further up in the picture you go, you get further away from the accident in distance and in time. And if you go far away up to the far left-hand top corner, you find fall of the Soviet Union, Gulf War, a long history of inter-service rivalry. And then you can follow these different tracks to see that it's really, really complicated. And there are a lot of things that are causing this final terrible accident. So what he's saying here, that you write your rules and procedures, that's your work as imagine, right? And you do write them as well as you can to think about everything that could happen. And then you put these rules and procedures into practical action. And people find that they need to adopt or adapt a little bit, because some of the procedures doesn't work very well. You find that there is an occasional procedure that is written for a kind of equipment that you don't have anymore, or you lack some resources, so you need to find a way to do it. So this becomes a locally mandated and efficient way of doing things. Because the reason you change from the procedures, it's a little bit drifting, is because you need to do that to get work done. And this local action becomes the accepted practice. This is the way we do things here. And this practice drifts from the procedure. So Snook was saying that with this terrible accident, started with a tendency to over-design and a bias to over-control. This whole mission in the north of Iraq was designed in America by people far away, and they tended to over-design the system because they wanted to make sure nothing bad was happening. And they wanted to make sure that all the different parts in this mission was working well together. Then comes a long enough period, and the mission had lasted for many years, to loosely couple time sufficient to generate substantial gaps between the globally synchronized rules and local sub-rule practice. So you had a design system, globally synchronized, making sure that all the different parts of this mission was holding together, making sense, and then you keep running for a few years. And you find that there are some of the subgroups that never come together. So the F-15 fighters are typically high-level fighters. The Army helicopters are typically low-level actors. They are coming from different organizations, Air Force and Army. They have different equipment, they are working in different areas, they are not tightly coupled, they are loosely coupled, and there's room for drifting within those two organizations. And then there is a reasonable chance that isolated subgroups like the F-15 fighters and the Army helicopters became tightly coupled at the point. And there we had the accident. So this is drifting. So to be able to learn and evolve, we need to learn not only from the things that go wrong, but from things that go right and how they go right. To be able to see difference between work as imagined and work as done, and to be able to find drifting, because drifting can create brittleness, and brittleness is the opposite to what we are trying to get here, resilience. Next is the ability to anticipate, and Holder is saying that this is probably the most difficult one, because this is about foreseeing the future, and that is difficult, of course. So the ability to anticipate is knowing what to expect, or being able to anticipate developments further into the future, such as potential disruptions, novel demands or constraints, new opportunities, or changing operating conditions. Of course, this is difficult. And he also says that many present-day systems where industrial safety is a concern are underspecified. For such systems, the principles of functioning are only partly known. Descriptions contain maybe too many details and take a long time to make, and the systems keep changing, so that descriptions must be frequently updated. So what you typically have is very detailed descriptions, probably describing something you had some time ago, because you get new things happening and you get new equipment, and it takes a long time to write new descriptions, so they become perhaps a little bit old. So there's a difference between work is imagined, the descriptions, and work is done. And it's really hard to really understand the system in full. Now, when it comes to anticipating, looking into the future, I can think of competence. And then I found something interesting. I found this article in the Eurocontrol Hindsight magazine. This is not the latest, but the second latest number. You can just Google Eurocontrol Hindsight 27 and you will find it. It's available as PDF, free to download. You can download the whole magazine or individual articles. And you see on the front page here, there is a reference to this article, Competence, Lagging or Leading, by Eric Holmar. It's a long, very good article, and I just quoted a few things from the article. He says, indeed, an almost universal response to failures and accidents is to analyze them in order to identify the competence that would have prevented them. So this is again lagging, right? And looking into the things that go wrong. And of course, you do that, you want to identify why it went wrong. You want to make sure that if there was a lack of competence causing this thing, you want to increase that competence so it doesn't happen again. And Holland says this is natural, of course, although some part of competence must be lagging. That is good. He also says it would clearly be interesting and useful if competence also could be leading. A complementary and more constructive approach is to consider what is needed for a system to function as required in expected and unexpected conditions alike, or in other words, to perform in a resilient manner. Now, up to here, he's just describing the problem. He's drawing a wish list. We want to have competence that is resilient, right? But how to do it? Well, interestingly, in this article, he points at the solution, and I find that very interesting. So he says the requisite competence could, for instance, be derived from the set of cognitive and interpersonal skills that are the focus of CRM. So this is the competence, skills that are the focus of CRM. And CRM is cockpit. It used to be cockpit resource management. It then evolved to be crew resource management. It has been around in aviation for many, many years, has developed a lot, changed a lot during the years. There's a lot of literature about CRM that you can find. And it's also used within maritime for bridge resource management. and it's becoming more and more popular in healthcare. I know there are a few hospitals in Sweden that have been working with CRM for many, many years. Unfortunately, I don't think we have a Swedish national standard for CRM, so it's more locally developed, but it is very interesting, and there's a lot to be taken from it. So Holdhagen says that examples of those skills are communication, decision-making, and leadership. As you will see, there is one more that he's leaving out, and I will soon tell you why. So the CRM skills, or also called non-technical skills, they are one, cooperation. So we're talking about crew, so it's a team working together, and cooperation is the ability to work effectively in a crew. Then it's leadership and managerial skills, and this is not the boss telling everyone what to do. This is something else. This effective leadership and managerial skills help to achieve joint task completion. So again, it's a crew working together within a motivated, fully functioning team through coordination and persuasiveness. So it's a special kind of leadership skills to get the crew to work well together. Then you have this one, the situation awareness. If you remember the three that Holdhagen said, this was not there, and there is a reason for it. I don't think Holdhagen likes situational awareness. There's quite a lot of people that have objections to it, and I think the reason is that sometimes you find an accident investigation where the conclusion is that this accident was caused by poor situation awareness, and that doesn't really say anything. So be a little bit careful with this one, situation awareness, but I still think that if you read it, you will find that there is something to take away from it. So situation awareness relates to one's ability to accurately perceive what is in the flight crew compartment, in this case, of course, any other environment if you're in another organization, and outside the aircraft or outside what you're doing. So you perceive, you understand, you get collect information about what is happening in the near environment and outside it. It's also one's ability to take this information to comprehend the meaning of different elements in the environment, and then the projection of their status in the near future. And I think even if there is objections against the term, I still think you can see that there is something of value here to really be aware of what is happening all the time and have the ability to understand what that information can give you in understanding what is happening and what could be happening in the near future. Finally, it is decision making. So this is a process of reaching a judgment or choosing an option and doing it in a team. So CRM is very interesting, and it can be an inspiration for many other industries or organizations, I think. An excellent example of very good CRM is the American DC-10. The rear engine exploded, cutting off a lot of systems for the aircraft, so it was basically uncontrollable. Still, the crew managed to take this severely damaged aircraft using the two remaining engines, and by only using the engines was able to control the aircraft, navigate it towards an airport, and make something of a crash landing on the airport. There were people killed in this aircraft, but there were also a lot of survivors from a situation that looked like sure death for everyone on board. And if you have the opportunity to read this accident investigation, you will find that it's fantastic CRM, crew resource management, that made this possible. How they all gathered together, shared workload within the crew, shared information and experience and knowledge to solve this very difficult situation. So there's a lot of picked up from the CRM. Now, another part that is very closely connected to CRM is what is called threat and error management. Again, this is a term that is a little bit questionable, and there are people that have opinions about this, but threat and error management is three categories of individual and team countermeasures. So how do you meet threats and the possibility of making an error? So there are three. There is the planning countermeasures, there are the execution countermeasures, and finally the review countermeasures. Now we are talking about anticipation here, so I will just take one of them. This is the planning countermeasures. So that is essential for managing anticipated and unexpected threats. You recognize that. That's really resilience, and this is the ability to anticipate. So it fits very well in here. And what it says that the countermeasures to be able to do anticipation is briefings, plans, workload assignment, and contingency. You find this with an air crew. They will, before they start the day of flying, they will gather to have a briefing, the whole crew, pilots and cabin crew, to talk about what's ahead of them, what kind of flights they're doing, what destinations they are heading, perhaps how many passengers they will have, if there's something special about this flight, what about the weather, what about alternative airports, things like that. And also workload assignment, who will be working where in the cabin. You have different posts in the cabin. The pilots, there are 2 pilots who will be flying, who will be monitoring the flight, who will take care of radio frequencies and so on. Then they go out to the aircraft, prepare the aircraft, get the passengers on board, start up the engines, and then there's a pre-takeoff briefing where the 2 pilots talk about which runway they plan to use, they expect to use. They assign the workload, who will be taxiing the aircraft, who will take off, who will do the monitoring and so on. There are the contingency plans. What happens if we have an engine failure during roll on the runway? If we have the engine failure when we become airborne, what are the procedures for going back for an emergency landing? What is the weather? What effect is that? So they really try to prepare a lot for what could happen, and that is really anticipation. So I find this interesting because Ronald is saying that the ability to anticipate may be the most difficult one, but he's also pointing to something very interesting here, the CRM skills, the non-technical skills. And if you're interested in that, you find a lot of literature and that can guide you into how to use that. There are also a lot of people with the high competence and qualification within CRM, typically in airlines, but also in other areas. So I think this is a good idea, and it's really about what is happening out there at the sharp end, right? So we only have one left, the ability to respond and adapt. And here Ronald is saying that this is knowing what to do or being able to respond to regular and irregular changes, disturbances, and opportunities by activating prepared actions or by adjusting current mode of functioning. So this is typically something that we are pretty good at. We do have plans, of course, for different kinds of emergencies. He's also saying that in order to respond, the system must therefore first detect that something has happened, then recognize what it is, and determine whether response is necessary, and finally know how to respond, when to begin, and when to stop. All very nice. For this one, I will just take an example of the guidelines, one of the cards. So this is a card that is called 3.2, Darwin Resilience Management Guidelines card 3.2. It's about establishing conditions for adapting plans and procedures during crisis and other events that challenge normal plans and procedures. The picture here is from the ATC Center in Malmö, south of Sweden. This is where I work. You see there are a lot of screens and a few people here. We can be up to 30 people working here at the same time. This photo was taken on a calmer situation, so there are a smaller number of people working here right now. And of course, this is all very well designed and imagined and all that. What you find here is the same room. On the top of the picture, you find like a small island. That is where the operational management is. So that's my working position as a watch supervisor. There is also a technical supervisor. You find a lot of screens, right? To the left of all the screens, you find a small container of binders. They are green, blue, yellow, and red binders. And the red ones typically contain checklists for all kinds of emergencies that we anticipate, that we have prepared for. This system could stop working, and then we do like this and this, or this could happen, and then we do like this and this. So we have really tried to think about everything that could happen. We have tried to anticipate, and we have prepared ourselves for all kinds of emergencies. But the guidelines 3.2, they say that often crises challenge the plans and procedures in place. And as a result, organizations need to support and maintain a clear and legitimate space of maneuver relative to normative plans and procedures. So I think what they're saying here, is that the blunt end must trust the sharp end to support and maintain a clear and legitimate space of maneuver, because that is needed. When something happens that is not exactly something that we have prepared for, we must be able to maneuver, to do something different. Sometimes you can take the checklist and just change it a little bit and still follow it. Sometimes you need to do something without a checklist. So this is my workplace. This is the watch supervisor. This is my colleague Annika here. Such space for maneuver is important for actors engaged in crisis response in order to adapt to unusual or unanticipated circumstances. And this is really resilience, isn't it? And it's important that you have it in writing, but it's also important to have it face to face. And my manager has told me this many, many times, that the supervisors are out there, you are out there 24/7. Us, the blunt end managers, we are here Monday to Friday, 8 to 17. The chances are that when something goes bad, you are the only one who is there. And I trust you to do what you think is right, whether or not it's according to procedures. What happens afterwards, I will support you, because I know that you are the one who was there. You were doing what you thought was best. So he's giving me this room to maneuver, and it's very important to be able to be resilient, to have a room of maneuvering. So if you keep a very tight schedule with your staff, if you blame them whenever they go outside procedure, when their work is done, it's not exactly as work is imagined, I think you're going to have a problem with your resilience. So the last one here was the ability to respond and adapt. And I'm basically saying that to get this one to work, you need to trust your sharp end and give them room to maneuver. So we are at the end. The Darwin Resilience Management Guidelines are not directly addressed to frontline operators or first responders in crisis management, are directed to managers. But let's not forget the sharp end, because developing resilience without knowledge of what happens at the sharp end and without cooperation with the staff at sharp end, I don't think that is possible. I'm finished. Thank you for listening. And now there is room for questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anders. I'll open the floor for questions. Do we have anyone that has a question for Anders? If not, then I would like to start off, Anders. Do you actually have any examples as your role as a watch supervisor where, call it ad hoc decisions or work as done gets fed back into the systems management plan? I'm thinking from an aspect of, you can call it gut feeling or experience, intuition, or good situational awareness that goes on, actually gets fed back to improve the plan rather than drifting from it.
Yes, I'm not quite sure if I get your question, but there's certainly the cases where I have been working as a watch supervisor on a weekend when no one else was there above me, so to say, where things happened that I couldn't make sense of it out of any checklist. There was no checklist that fitted into what happened. So I really had to use that room to maneuver to find out a way to handle that. And of course, that experience goes back and possibly could end up being a new checklist or something like that covers it. But I also have examples where we sort of found out that there had been drifting going on, and we found that there was an increasing gap between work as imagined and work as done. And there were sort of two ways of dealing with this. Either you could say that's not good. We have work as imagined and work as done differing too much, and order people to go back to work as imagined. But we realized that the reason the gap was increasing was because people were doing what they had to do to get the work done, both in an efficient way and in a safe way. So what we did instead was first make a safety assessment of the new work as done, to see if there were part of the drifting that was actually good and acceptable, and if there were parts that were not good and not acceptable, where we found brittleness. So after the safety assessment, we changed some of the procedures so that we were sort of allowing what work is done, but we also found things within this drifting, the new work is done that was not acceptable, that was causing brittleness. So we had to straighten that up and bring people back to work as imagined. So yes.
Thank you. I think that's a very good example of closing the loop and actually improving your plans by listening to the operators and collecting the drifting rather than let it drift further. Does anyone else have an example that they would be able to or like to share from your experiences of work? Not at this moment, and we won't force anyone to speak either. Do we have any more questions for Anders? If not, then thank you, Anders. This was very interesting, and once again, thank you for sharing your knowledge and thoughts on this important matter indeed. I would just like to, before we stop, give you a heads up on the next DCoP webinar that will be held possibly at the end of April or beginning of May, where Mr. David Woods will be sharing his experience on applications of resilience thinking in the US. I will be getting back to you with an official invite. If you aren't a member of the DCoP at the moment but would like to join, then please drop me an email and I will send you an invitation. I shall post my email address in the chat field. It should be seen to all at the moment. So just send me an email and I will invite you to become a member of the DCoP, which is free of charge, and that will also mean that you get invites to future events. Okay, if no one has anything else to add to this discussion, then thank you, Anders, and I thank you all for joining us today. Speak to you soon. All the best.
Johan?
Yes.
What could happen in the right-hand part of that bell-shaped curve I showed you when you're able to finish sooner than expected, right?
Exactly. You maybe have a few more pictures you